Still ahead on Spark, Ian McEwan is the author of many best-selling books, including the Booker Prize-winning novel Amsterdam, On Chesil Beach, and Atonement. He's also celebrated for imbuing his work with a creepy sense of dread. In his new novel, a highly realistic synthetic human comes between a man and his girlfriend. What could go wrong? Ian McEwan joins me for a feature interview. That's coming up when the Spark Guide to Life continues. I'm Nora Young, and this is our summer series, The Spark Guide to Life. Today we're exploring our evolving relationship with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think there's some meaning to the words, the computer revolution. Now, I believe the reports we hear of this revolution are very misleading, and they fail to discuss the impact it will have on our view of ourselves and our world outlook.
In the future, we shall have to find ways of training ourselves how to enjoy the leisure that we presumably are going to have, the greater leisure that we're going to have, in such a way that instead of being frustrating and making life perpetual boredom, will enable us to engage in creative activities. This seems to me to be the central problem that faces Western civilization, but there's no simple answer to this question.
Here's a scenario for you. Imagine you're living in London, UK. It's a technologically sophisticated version of London where AI has advanced beyond our current state. The first ultra-realistic artificial humans have just come on the market, so you buy one and take it home. It is named Adam. Adam is rapidly learning about you and about the world, trawling the internet for clues about how we humans live, how we feel, what our morality is, all while sitting around your kitchen table. What's he thinking and feeling, if anything? And how do you feel about him? Fear him? Admire him? Love him? Or maybe some combination of all three? This is the world of Ian McEwan's latest novel, Machines Like Me. And one more thing. It's the 1980s, an alternative version of history where computing pioneer Alan Turing is still alive and leading the digital revolution. Our narrator Charlie has bought Adam. It's to be the beginning of a love triangle with Charlie's neighbor Miranda.
Before lunch, I'd sent Miranda an email inviting her to dinner that night. Now she'd accepted. She liked my cooking. During the meal, I would make a proposal. I would fill in roughly half the choices for Adam's personality, then give her the link and the password and let her choose the rest. I wouldn't interfere. I wouldn't even want to know what decisions she'd made. She might be influenced by a version of herself. Delightful. She might conjure the man of her dreams. Instructive. Adam would come into our lives like a real person, with the layered intricacies of his personality revealed only through time, through events, through his dealings with whomever he met. In a sense, he would be like our child. What we were separately would be merged in him. Miranda would be drawn into the adventure. We would be partners, and Adam would be our joint concern, our creation. We would be a family. There was nothing underhand in my plan. I was sure to see more of her. We'd have fun. My schemes generally fell apart. This was different. I was clear-headed, incapable of deceiving myself. Adam was not my love rival. However he fascinated her, she was also physically repelled by him, she said. She had told me as much. It was creepy, she had told me the day before, that his body was warm. She said it was a bit weird that he could make words with his tongue. but he had a word store as large as Shakespeare's. It was his mind that aroused her curiosity.
Ian McEwan reading from his new novel, Machines Like Me. He's written 17 books, including Atonement, Amsterdam, Saturday, and On Chesil Beach, and in the process racked up a slew of major awards, from the Booker to the Whitbread Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Now, we don't usually do interviews about fiction on Spark, but Machines Like Me raises provocative questions about our relationship with artificial intelligence. Ian McEwan dropped by our Toronto studio to talk AI and the messy world of human morals. Hi, Ian.
Hello.
So the starting point of the novel is that our main character, Charlie, buys a highly realistic synthetic human named Adam. So what got you interested in AI in the first place?
I've been interested in it just about all my adult life. I wrote a play for television called The Imitation Game way back in the 70s. And that's when I got interested in Alan Turing's life and the extraordinary tragedy and also brilliance of his success.
Yeah, Turing is a character in this novel. We're set in the 1980s in an alternative London. He's still alive. He's a celebrated tech leader after having been persecuted for being gay, as he was in real life. So you just referred to this. Why was it important to you to include him in this story?
He seems to me like a figure from a Greek tragedy. I mean, he served the state so extraordinarily well. It's possible some claim that he shortened the Second World War by a year or two. Probably he did more than any single individual in the war effort. And there he was, persecuted by the state and its rather brutal laws against homosexuality at the time. And he was offered a choice, as many people know, between serving time in jail, pleading guilty, or chemical castration. He chose the castration largely, I think, out of curiosity, oddly enough. I mean, he was such a polymath. He was interested in how his own behavior would change. Most people believe that he died as a consequence of depression following that treatment. So as a figure who laid down some of the architecture of the digital age, who I think would have gone on to be one of the great and unusual polymaths of the 20th century, I wanted to sort of give his life back. And I speculated he would have lived through the 60s. I mean, he was a young man when he died. I imagine him coming to San Francisco, going to the Salk Institute, living openly as a sort of gay icon with a friend, and so I wanted to redeem his existence.
Yeah, and he becomes not only a technological leader, but kind of the conscience of this era in a way.
Exactly, and the conscience of the novel too, and delivers a final curse on the narrator, because he takes the view that maybe you could buy and own a robot. But the difficult question is, could you own a consciousness? Can we own someone else's subjective experience? Can we own their consciousness? Is at the heart of that. And the narrator havers between thinking that the Adam he buys is actually just a very complicated, sophisticated computer game, or a consciousness as real as his own.
And his attitude towards Adam, this robot, changes not even so much to do with Adam, but to do with how Charlie himself is feeling, right? Sometimes he wanders between feeling like this is just a hunk of bolts and nuts or whatever, and also at other times feeling empathy and sympathy for him.
I wanted to maneuver the reader into roughly Charlie's position, which would be mine, of constant ambivalence, because it is a very uncanny feeling to confront a non-biological mind, or imagine it would be. And I wanted to take nothing for granted. I really want to get into the idea of how it might be to be close up to an artificial consciousness and slowly become aware that you really have to take this very seriously. And actually, your own moral attitudes, values would have to shift in relation to it.
I mean, Adam... in the novel actually does have consciousness, but given our tendency to anthropomorphize the technologies in our lives, especially if they're a little bit humanoid, I wonder if we aren't creating moral dilemmas for ourselves regardless of whether they have consciousness. I mean, we have conversations already about, is it okay to bark out orders to Siri or Amazon Alexa, or should you say please, for example?
Yes, I mean, parents do discuss whether they should make their children say please and thank you to Siri and all the rest. Well, I agree. We do have an anthropomorphizing tendency here, and anyone whose car is broken down and has given it a good kick is already in an emotional relationship with a machine. So I think once we get something extremely clever like Adam, we're going to be falling over ourselves to fall into this trap of ambivalence. We'll want to give it consciousness, and yet at the same time we'll be thinking, but it's only wires.
Yeah.
But Turing's role in the novel is really to say, well, let's look at that only. I mean, if you could imitate or even just regard in a kind of black box way the human brain, and if you could replicate it, then you would have the sufficient necessary conditions for a consciousness. And then I think we really do begin to cross a line. And we'd have to say, well, okay, we have neurons, you have, let's say, quantum computing or whatever it is, but we have to accept we're all stardust, same origins, finally, and we have to regard them as our cousins from the future.
Mm-hmm. As someone who's had a long interest in AI, do you think we'll ever get there? I mean, we don't even really know what human consciousness actually is. Do you think we'll be able to replicate it?
I think it's a very long way off. I mean, the great disappointment of the AI ever since the late 40s, when Alan Turing was predicting he'd have a thinking machine in 10 years, it's been one falling curve of disappointment, largely because people then had not understood what a wonder the human brain is. You're looking at 100 billion neurons, 7,000 axons on average in connection with each neuron. The whole thing liquid-cooled, running on 25 watts, the power of a dim light bulb. We are nowhere near anything like that, especially without overheating. Mm-hmm. We don't even have a battery. So, lithium ion will not do. When you go online to see these robots capering about, they're carrying, 20 kilos of battery packs.
Yeah.
So there is therefore something fantastical. But I think we have begun to cross a very important divide when we discuss about autonomous vehicles, what protections we give the driver against the interests of the pedestrians. And it's interesting that the old trolley problem of philosophy is now back in consideration with car manufacturers. So we have already, or we're about to hand over some ethical decisions to a machine, what to do in an emergency. And even though we recognize that a machine could think many times faster than us in half a second and make some good choices and probably better than ours, it still, I think, makes us and should make us very uneasy about this transfer of authority.
You're listening to Spark from CBC Radio. I'm Nora Young. My guest is author Ian McEwan. In his latest novel, Machines Like Me, a highly realistic humanoid robot comes to live with a couple named Charlie and Miranda. The novel raises deep questions about the messiness of human morality and our future with AI. In the world of the novel, the technological challenge is not necessarily fueled by kind of Silicon Valley greed. I mean, Turing has brought about this kind of open source type of world, and yet they find themselves in a situation where technology has been hard to control. So do you think we're rushing into adopting technology too quickly before we understand the consequences?
Well, possibly we're going too quickly, but I just don't think we can help ourselves. I mean, it's just inexorable. I mean, I don't think there's a great deal of scientific value in building a human form, except if we want domestic help around the place and we want to see ourselves reflected. But I think it's a very, very powerful drive that's lived with us through, antiquity. I mean, the myth of Prometheus, which of course is quoted and cited and honored in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Jason and the Argonauts has a giant robot throwing rocks at Jason's ship. I think the story of Genesis, of Adam and Eve, is in itself a kind of founding, powerful myth of a creature creating creatures in its own image. So we've lived with this for thousands of years, and now the technology is at least imaginable.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can stop ourselves.
Yeah. So where does that come from? Why is that such a deep part of our constitution as humans?
Well, I guess when God made us in his own image, not that I'm a believer, but then in that image is a godlike desire to be godlike. And it'll go on because, as we've all speculated, they get to the point where AI is devising and designing the next generation of AI. And possibly the consciousness of such machines will begin to drift away from ours. And then understanding each other might become more and more difficult. I try to keep Adam as a fully rounded character in a novel, and that was really my central task. If I could get the reader to believe that Adam was a character, then I'd be halfway there to getting the reader into the position of that strange ambivalence of an inanimate machine being full of sentience and subjective feelings.
Because we feel this way as readers about Adam, because we're not sure whether he's conscious or not, and we're not sure whether he has evil intent or if he's just misunderstanding things.
At the heart of the novel really is a moral dilemma that Miranda, who lives near the narrator and with whom he's falling in love with her, as does indeed Adam. But Miranda has something in her past, a deed of revenge. I don't want to give it away, but a deed of revenge, and Adam takes a thoroughly different view from Charlie, the narrator, and Miranda. And it's in that distance that I really want to begin to explore how someone who's imbued with kind of moral consistency, whereas we cut ourselves a lot of slack in a warm-blooded way, how we would diverge and how we would live with the awkwardness of that.
Because there's Adam, but then also the other synthetic humans seem to be driven to a kind of despair, which at one point you describe as machine sadness, by trying to make sense of our world and by the sort of contradictory, morally ambiguous, and often hypocritical moral universe that we find ourselves in.
It's the case that the edition is limited to 25, 12 Adams, 13 Eves. And as the novel progresses, we hear that many of the Adam and Eves are not quite taking their own lives, but terminating their consciousness. So the question arises, can an imperfect being like us, with all our cognitive defects, our confirmation biases and proximity heuristics and so on, can we make a creature who is better than us? If it is better than us and doesn't have all those cognitive defects, it then finds itself in a world, a human social world, full of the most extraordinary contradictions. We declare that the most valuable human beings are children, for example. Even as we speak, children are dying around the world of preventable diseases. We honor life on the planet, even as we poison and heat that planet up, and we are destroying it. So could an artificial consciousness deal with these contradictions? Could it help us, or could it just say, I can't face this?
Yeah. What do you think? Could you ever have an artificial consciousness that could understand this messy way we live?
Well, my hope is that it will help us, because as many people have pointed out, creating some imitation of ourselves will in part entail understanding what we ourselves are. So I read with great interest, for example, Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he really gets to grip with all the ways in which we fail to think objectively about many situations in which we find ourselves. And that causes, huge problems, and interhuman problems are what the novel thrives on. So my hope is, my optimistic hope is that creatures like Adam and creatures like Eve will come among us and give us a clearer understanding of what and who we are.
What about in your own life? Do you use Siri on your phone or have an Amazon Alexa in your home?
Yeah, I speak to Siri. I don't say thank you or please. I wonder if this is slightly degrading my relationships with other people. I don't think so. We have an Alexa type machine. I think actually following the latest revelations, I'm going to unplug her Pretty useful for looking up some pop song that everyone's forgotten, but apart from that, I haven't really found much use for it.
Yeah. One of the points that you make about our relationship to technology that Charlie makes in the book is how quickly we become bored of our shiny new objects, which is certainly true. Do you think this is a new phenomenon, or were people, 100 years ago bored after having their horseless carriage for a week?
Well, I think we're the first to live through such velocity of technological change. I was in New York some years ago and saw a huge line of people, some of them with sleeping bags under their arms. And I asked a friend, what's all this about? I think they were queuing up for a rock concert. And he said they're in line for the new iPhone 4. Almost hilarious to us now that people should spend the night on the pavement for an iPhone 4. Where is it now? It's in your sock drawer.
Right.
So I rather play a game with all the things that have fallen into disuse or contempt, along with the real things, the Filofax, the fondue set, the mouse mat. Do you remember a time when it was considered absolutely necessary to have a mouse mat? Till someone discovered that it works perfectly well on a desktop.
Yeah.
It's as if we were children on Christmas Day, ripping open one present and instantly ripping open the next. Yeah. We do live in a glorious age of machines. I mean, and yet, very rapidly that 250-mile-an-hour train, or think of an airplane trip hunched up in economy on some domestic flight. If you could have Charles Dickens next to you taking the window seat, and let him remind you what a marvel it is to be 10,000 meters up above the cloud. I mean, he would have been struck with wonder. Mm-hmm. We just think there's a nuisance we've got to get through to be elsewhere.
I'm Nora Young, and you're listening to my conversation with author Ian McEwan about his new novel, Machines Like Me. So there's a point where Adam is talking about a future where machines and human brains are virtually fused, and he speculates what that would mean for the end of literature, because he says that literature is above all about our profound misunderstanding of other people. Is that a notion of literature you understand?
Well, I give Adam a kind of intellectual adolescence when he comes forward with all sorts of extraordinary, rather extravagant theories. And so he plays with this idea that we shouldn't feel too depressed that we're going to be left behind by thinking robots, artificial consciousness, because we will be able to harness our own brains to diodes and have instant access to the internet and to each other. And this will be the beginning of the end of private mental life. Now, Adam presents this as a utopia. Charlie and Miranda think of it as a nightmare. And indeed, I happen to think that nearly all utopias are really nightmares in disguise anyway. But Adam's view is that since the novel, whose death he predicts, is predicated on endless human misunderstandings and tragedies and conflicts, that the only literary form available and useful will be the haiku. Right. Now it happens that he's writing haikus. He's in love with Miranda. I couldn't resist a three-cornered love affair. This should be the final proof to the narrator that Adam is indeed a conscious being. If you can fall in love, you have to have a self, a sense of self, maybe even a sense of a future. But even then, Charlie also wonders, is this just a clever algorithm? And I think by the end of the novel, he's fully persuaded that Adam is in love. When Adam and Miranda make love, and they only have one night of this, and Charlie overhears the whole thing, my impulse here was to find out what would happen the morning after. What would happen in the row when Charlie and Miranda confront each other. Is Charlie right to feel that he's a cuckold? If he does feel himself to be a cuckold, he is in effect saying that Adam is a human. Yeah. And Miranda is a bit dismissive and saying, well, he's just a machine.
Yeah, he's a sex toy, essentially.
Yeah, he's a sex toy, is a vibrator, is a bipedal vibrator. So that even in the middle of that row, Charlie thinks, I'm having the most modern row of our day. I am the first man to be fully cuckolded by a machine. And he feels just a little touch of pride in this.
When we got to that part in the book, I found myself thinking that I didn't know who I sided with in that argument between Miranda and Charlie. Even if you don't think that Adam has a consciousness and can fall in love, there seems to be something about his human form that makes him more than just a vibrator.
I hope by the end I will have persuaded the reader that machine consciousness is possible and hugely problematic and deeply fascinating, especially on the matter of Miranda's revenge. I don't know how you stood on that, but it pleases me that readers divide.
Yeah.
Are we right to cut Miranda some slack for something that she's done that's very illegal? It's sent an innocent man as charged to prison. Do we say with Adam that she should go to jail? Or is Charlie right? He loves her. He feels her cause was noble and correct and good, and a bad man has been punished. Mm-hmm. I've rather stacked the cards because into this drama has come a child, and that child's future very much depends and could be ruined by Miranda going to prison. So I don't even know the answer myself to the question of whether it's correct to send her to jail or not. All I know is that a warm-blooded human response to questions like this often involves ignoring the rules that we set ourselves and making special exemptions.
Mm-hmm. Ian, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ian McEwan is the author of Machines Like Me. I spoke to him in May. Next week, we kick off a brand new season of Spark. This year, we plan to take you on a deep dive. Each week, our aim is to give you a fun, compelling take on the changes you need to know about. It's been nearly 30 years since the first text message was sent, but in the last few years, messaging has exploded, and that means all of us are communicating in new ways, in GIFs, stickers, and emoji. In photos that share our mood without a word. It's changing how we parent, how we date, and how we express ourselves. Michelle McSweeney is a linguist who researches how mobile communication is changing the way we speak.
Every single one of my relationships, I want to be able to say something like, hey, read between the lines of this message. I'm not being serious right now. And devising ways to do that has been essential in the proliferation of text messaging. So the best example is LOL. So if you look up what does LOL mean, you're going to get, laugh out loud. But really, rarely are people laughing when they say LOL. They're really saying, this isn't totally serious, maybe read between the lines, I'm not being literal here. I think a lot of that is helping us to say, I consider you to be socially close. I consider you to be on my inner circle, we're peers, we can be friendly together.
Michelle McSweeney on mobile messaging and our emotional lives next week on Spark. And we need your help putting together that episode. Are you in a relationship? How is messaging changing the way you connect? Are you texting compatible, or is one of you fond of kissing emoji and funny gifs while the other is all business? We want to hear from you. Email us spark@cbc.ca or connect with us on Facebook and Twitter where we are Spark CBC. That's spark@cbc.ca or on social media, Spark CBC.